Yeah, my name's Justine Chambers. I'm a contemporary dance artist here in Vancouver. I work in many ways as a dance artist. I work in galleries and in theaters and in the world. I have a writing practice attached to dance, but it all feels like dance to me. Um, I currently am a term lecturer at the School for Contemporary Arts at SFU and teach in other places in the city also. But yeah, I think that's me in a very
Cool.
small shell.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess what interested you about being part of this Ars Scientia residency and working with physicists?
Of course, I don't understand physics to this day, which I feel great about also, because I like that I had this physics encounter that wasn't about me learning physics, but it was like looking at where ideas overlap. But this idea of sort of like these non-productive residencies that everybody likes to think that they can do, but we don't always really think about what that means. But I also, I'm always lamenting like time to read. Like since I became a mother, there is no reading in my life, or it's like I'm only reading the paragraph I need to, or I'm listening to a podcast of it because I have no time. So this idea of having like time concentrated on like sharing resources or interests and that we would be reading things and discussing them, like having book club, felt really, really like a rich moment to like pause and think again, because I feel like I've been in a process of doing, and not having time even to be reflective about what I'm doing, see who I'm in conversation with, what I could be in conversation with. So it felt like, one of these like mini school opportunities. And it felt like also when I'm always a little bit if I'm a little bit intimidated by something or a lot intimidated by something, I always think it's a good idea to do it. And I had that feeling. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I fully agree. I think like the intuition kind of kicks in with like if it's a challenge, I think there's a part of me that definitely wants to just jump in and do it and try it. How did that exchange of ideas and working with people with different perspectives perhaps impact the trajectory that you thought your work was going in, or see your work going in?
That's a very good question. Like I always think about, it feels like a bit of a grant question, right? Like what are the impacts? And I think those things are always so hard to know. I mean, good thing we're 6 months out and there has been a little bit of time. But I think like in terms of how it impacts my practice as I understand it, which is a moving target always, it feels like to me, like I don't have just when I think I know what I'm doing, it's no longer what I'm doing. So I always go back to this idea of relation and how are we together, right? And like being in a project, an undetermined project in some ways with two physicists who hold like a certain kind of knowledge that is a lifetime of accumulation, right? Like all of us, but it's so outside of my understanding, not fully outside of my interest, because I was always so fascinated by like what came out of their mouths. I'm like, oh, that's a thing to think about. Amazing. But just like how to reconcile being together and what are we doing? There's always this question, like, what are we doing? And what are we trying to do together? Are we trying to do anything? Are we just hanging out? And like working through those ideas of productivity through just being together, like, is that enough of a product? And is that enough to fulfill like maybe the larger idea of this residency, and then what happens in the exchange, and does that have to be acted upon immediately? Like just asking all those questions about like, what is genuine exchange? How does it occur? When does it occur? And I felt like having those meetings with Luke and Sarah allowed me to keep asking those questions of myself and like, yeah, like what is it to be practical about those things and not theoretical about those things, like, which is a question I'm always asking. Like I like any good art nerd, I love theory, but I always am like, so what does that mean? Like, right now, what is that? Like, what, like, okay, great theory, yes. And also the physicists I work with were practical. They weren't theoretical physicists. So I felt like in this way of practice and doing, we really understood each other because we go in every day and we do the thing actively. Do the thing, we're not. So there was sort of this, and also Sarah still takes ballet and like has this sort of dance connection, but there was just something about this idea. We talked a lot about like practical versus theoretical, and like how not to get lost in the theoretical, but also to not get stuck in the practical. So I think there was some of those questions that I'm always curious about that got sort of chewed through a different lens or a different set of teeth, I guess. Yeah.
And as someone that loves theory so much, I was reminded of how, like, when I started grad school, I was like, oh, I have to understand everything about this theoretical text so deeply so that I can synthesize my own ideas about it. But that really kind of confronted me with the idea that, like, you don't need to understand everything, and you never really will, even about one single text. You just kind of take what resonates with you and move forward with that. And I think, yeah, that kind of was maybe a critical point in the residency program, I think, was just, yeah, being open to what a text can give you. It's kind of like an agential entity on its own. And we share in like this reciprocal relationship with it. It's not something you have to have a command over or a mastery over. It just kind of, you both exist in these different spaces together, and you interact with each other.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that was sort of the interesting thing, bringing it to, a first year dance aesthetics. It really related to Thomas DeFrance, who is a Black dance scholar, who is like who talks a lot about being willing not to know. And I think there is something about like in the not knowing a text and not being able to understand it, not being able to crunch it, that perhaps you bring forward queries that would not show up if everybody knew what they were talking about. And there's always that, like I always say to that, like the dumb question usually confounds everybody.
Yes.
Might be a dumb question, and then it's always something super like basic, and you're like, the people who feel like, so I like having that my own sense of understanding be disrupted, because that's where I remember, if I feel like I got a handle on something, I think I get lazy, in fact, if I'm going to be really honest. So it's nice to like, and I believe that too about like theory, like we all sort of grab that one sentence that resonates with us, and then we work with that until we've exhausted it. And then in the working through that one thought, you can return to the text, and then all of a sudden the rest of the text starts to open up for you, right? Instead of feeling like you have to grab the whole and like
if you were to continue working with Luke and Sarah, or just working in this interdisciplinary manner, what kind of ideas are there that you still want to explore, or like maybe there are more specific questions you still have?
I mean, I think one question that maybe I had like at the beginning, like, and it's always my question around collaboration in general, or like collaborative practice, interdis, whether it's among arts disciplines or outside, is like, when is one no longer in service to the other, and when have you made that other thing, right? And like, I don't feel like I got there to like making that other thing. But I guess what I'm so interested in, and maybe this is some of the carrying on that's going through with me and Kelly sort of approaching this project, this larger project, which is still working itself out, is like, when do I not see the dance or the physics, and when are they either not, how can we make it so the dance is not, or like the art is not in service to the physics, or the physics isn't in service to the other, or when are they both in service to each other so that they become some other thing, it becomes some other space nobody would have inhabited before.